Good afternoon and welcome to UnitedTV. My name is Kemal Erkan. Today is November 15, 2024. We are here with UnitedTV Weekly Updates. We are going to cover mostly U.S. politics today, as we have a lot of new appointments coming up from the Trump administration. And also there are some local, at state level, some changes happening, and we are going to discuss that. And in these events, we try to cover different areas of economy, healthcare, and politics, and global news. Sometimes makes it is becoming part of our focus, as well as if we believe that it's going to impact what we have here day to day in the United States. And BRICS was one of the examples of that, as we know that the value of the currency and what we do, what we can do with it, and how we have been using it. It has a lot to do with our U.S. economy. I thought it was always important for us to discuss it, and we'll have some updates on that. Most likely it's going to be next week. But today, one of our directors, Anthony Anugu, is going to join me. And Anthony and we are going to go over the new appointees. Anthony, you can turn your camera on, and then I will bring up our new second-term Donald Trump cabinet members. Some of these members are going to be appointed. Well, they are going to be all appointed, but some of them are going to need a confirmation from the Senate, and some of them don't. So I'm going to actually play this video for us. So while we are talking about these names, if you believe any of these are kind of surprising or you were not expecting, it's kind of like a freestyle that will go. And let me bring this up as well. So the video is going to play on site. So I want to kind of just point out some of the people. Susie Willis or Willis? Wiles. So she's the chief of staff, and I think this was not a surprise. So they were expecting her. And she actually will be the first woman to serve as the White House chief of staff. So it's, I don't know why we need to wait for Trump to make that happen. All the Democrats could have done that, but Trump has that now. So this was kind of all the prediction was around her name, and then he trusts her a lot, and there is no problem there. So Deputy Chief of Staff is Stephen Miller, and he was not actually a big surprise either, I guess, right?
Not as surprising. That wasn't the last Trump administration.
So he's one of the actually longest people who's been working with Trump, longest serving people working with Trump, and then I think they are happy with each other. And the White House counsel, Bill McKinley, this was actually not maybe expected much. Not really.
Florida rep, Gates.
So one of the very colorful person is Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, I guess. So there's a picture of him on the video. It's not this one, but it's coming up right after this. Very interesting character. So some of the patriotic side of like maybe going a little bit too extreme in some of these names. That's what I'm kind of seeing. There are some good appointees, but then there are some who are kind of like they're going to bring a lot of controversy around.
Out of left field.
Right.
Like, the one I'm focused on for this reason, the health, which is the RFK Jr.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to that,
Yeah.
right? So we'll get to that, and also we have these guys, Vivek and Elon. I don't know how they're playing the sandbox.
Yeah.
And then one really kind of big controversy is around Attorney General Matt Gaetz. He is he was in a lot of trouble prior to this.
Yeah, I have quite a number of ethics investigations um, filed or initiated against him in the House. Um, and investigations at the level of the ethics committee in the House is usually
We need to speak up into there.
Yeah, the ethics investigations in the House typically are bipartisan. So um, and there are views on either side of the aisle regarding in terms of how much confidence his House colleagues have in him. So to put it mildly.
So I was actually I was kind of surprised with this one in a way that this is a person who actually whose name was tied into sex trafficking and drug allegations. Now, not sure what was the outcome of those. I'm assuming uh, it was closed because he was able to get this nominee. These charges apparently in 2020 was closed. Um, Now, he's going to be in charge of for all those people who were actually investigating him. Even if he's innocent, I think with all the controversy around his name, um, I don't know if I would actually really go with that name because that's one of those positions that's going to require integrity and kind of like a clean white page for whoever is representing. And there are a lot of people who could actually have done that position better. I personally believe that he's going to have some challenges to get the confirmation from Senate. So it may not.
It's certainly going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it may not go so smooth. And, you know, I may be wrong, and if you are wrong, we'll cut this part of the video. But I think what happened when those investigations was happening, he was in Congress. And then as soon as it started, he resigned. So that it was not investigated internally by the Congress. But I need to double check that. So
Yeah, yes, it will need to be, and that's from my recollection, not so certain that he did, because just because he
and
was,
then they're not able to hear you there saying.
yeah, saying that I'm not so certain that he did resign, because I seem to recall that there was some incident involving him with regard to the speakership and the change from the California rep who was a speaker then to the current speaker Johnson, and it appeared that he was a prime mover in that in that change that happened. And I don't recall that he had resigned at that time.
Mhm.
So I'm not quite sure about that.
So it is. I mean, I wasn't able to check. I know I read it in a couple of different places, but I wasn't able to confirm that. So we'll uh, we'll see. Okay, so House of Speaker Mike Johnson announced later Wednesday. So this is one of the latest news. Florida Congressman did. Okay, so here let's see. He did resign. he did resign so that the House of Ethics Committee no longer has the jurisdiction to continue to investigate. So that's pretty sneaky. So yeah, that's not wrong. So we don't need to delete the video.
So he apparently resigned after Johnson became a speaker.
So Department of Homeland Security is someone who's killing her dog who was 14 months old because the dog was useless. God help. Department of Health, what Anthony wants to talk about today, is the RFK Jr. I personally am happy with this choice, although he has some issues on the vaccine side of the healthcare, and I'm not sure if I'm 100% on board with everything he has, but I think he can make a really good impact on the healthcare side of it. So, Anthony, what do we think about him?
It's one of those
a bit louder, Anthony,
it's one of those appointments that comes with some element of risk with it. One of the things I've learned over time is it's what you say while you're outside of government is one thing. Then what you say when you are in government is a whole different thing, because you're confronted by the institution of government. There are three areas that RFK Jr. Says he has an agreement on as his primary focus. One is one of transparency and regulation. One is about has to do with chemicals and drugs and the science behind those. And the third one has to do with eradication of or diminution of chronic diseases in 2 years. But that's it. I don't know how feasible that is within that timeline. But let's go with the first one, which talked about regulation, transparency regulation. And he's partially right that. I'll give you a quick example. This has specifically to do with the part of the FDA that regulates medical devices, right? It has a budget of about $785 million, and about half of that comes from industry fees that's levied against by the FDA against pharmaceutical companies and device makers, right? But on the face of it, that creates a conflict of interest, right?
Oh.
It creates a conflict of interest because you're funded by the same organizations that you're regulating. And the outgoing head of that device unit in the FDA, for instance, had a situation where his wife was actually lobbying the FDA on behalf of a company that was seeking an approval from the FDA, right? So there is some truth in this view of conflict in regulation. However, that amount of money from the industry assessment is the reason why the FDA can hire blind scientists and be competitive in hiring those scientists. Because if it's not able to hire top-level scientists, then it cannot do its job.
So if I want to make sure for those who are not able to maybe hear everything, and in case you are wondering, he's switching your camera to the Logitech. So Ethan, so it's just
Could you switch it? I'm not too sure why it's not popping up.
on the Zoom. Is it like plugged in? So
that would be helpful.
Yeah, that is plugged in. So those things happen. So Anthony, while your camera is coming up, so are we talking about the FDA being financed by the other organizations who are actually not just government ones, right?
Yes, they are financed. The bulk of their financing, above half of that, It's coming from those
So
industries.
he is actually complaining about something that actually government does not have full control over, maybe with the funds.
Does it, because essentially what it means is that if pharmaceutical company A is responsible for a significant chunk of the budget for that unit, and that same company now comes back seeking approval for either a device or drug, as the case may be, how are we certain that there's complete transparency in this? The other side of it will be, the other argument on it will be that there are protocols in place for instance, drug development, research, and approval of drugs.
Mhm.
There are well-established, long-established protocols for that. But it does create the appearance of conflict, as we saw with the case of the outgoing head of the device unit in the FDA, where there are questions about his wife being a representative of one of the companies that was seeking approval from the FDA. So that part of it. But the reason why I mention this is that there's always a tension about these issues, because on one hand, if the FDA is not competitive in hiring top-level scientists, there is huge problems that it creates.
Because they cannot go through that process otherwise.
Yes, they cannot go through that. So there is some sense in those industry assessments, right? But he does have a point in terms of that transparency issue that he mentioned. The second thing that he seems focused on has to do with the science behind chemicals and drugs. And he's going to have a really hard time in that area because there are no two ways about science. You either do good science or you're not doing good science. And the standards that govern scientific research are well known, gone through these over decades and decades. And if you say, for instance, as in his case, that small quantities of fluoride in water is the reason for autism in children, you have to have the science to back that up. You can't just make that assertion.
So is his vaccine issue for all vaccines, or is it like related to the COVID and it started with that?
I think that the COVID exacerbated it, but he does have issues with other vaccines. And I often point to a recent WHO report, the World Health Organization report, showing that childhood vaccination is in decline in a number of places across the world. And this is all coming from the preponderance of false information around vaccines. Those things have cumulative effects across the world. A number of diseases that were thought to have been completely eradicated are suddenly rearing their heads again. These are not random events. They're coming as a result of messages that are being pushed out, wrong messages that are being pushed out, which has impact on mothers in Africa or Southeast Asia making decisions whether to vaccinate their children or not. So those all have impacts.
Maybe he may be a little bit out of touch with this. Because I think if we are just taking United States as base, you may not really see the actual efficacy or the benefit and other things, because we don't have all the other factors in those situations where things are not the same in the rest of the world. So you see what I mean? Like, you can't just dismiss, like, if today COVID happens and then vaccines happens again, it becomes available, would you take it? I would.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So it's not going to change. There are people who don't want to take it. Fine. But I would still do that. So that doesn't mean that like just because he disagrees with that doesn't mean that we need to change the entire, especially with the kids. So now you said something that's really important. So science is it doesn't just stay in one spot. So it does change. Things does change. So unless we have something better, uh, our position is going to be same. So
Yes.
one of the issues that we have, other than vaccine, the way that we are addressing the chronic disease, and he does have a point with the with the way that we have the foods that's available, whether or not they are healthier. But there are parts is morbid obesity is not all about how much we eat. It's a disease that's not now. Can you cure it in different ways? Well, if someone with 77 BMI, you're not going to put that person on diet.
Yes.
So I mean, um, there are good. What I'm worried about is when he's making like the vaccine as the number one concern for his legacy. Some of the good stuff that he's doing is not going to get a lot of attention, and they may not be done, or he may not be getting any credit. I think from his cabinet, he may be the like. If I have to just agree and disagree with his picks, I would probably have picked him as uh, Secretary of Health as well. But still, he has a lot to work on. So
he does. Personally, I wouldn't pick him for a number of reasons. And just like I said in the beginning, it's one thing to say some things while you're outside of government, or to hold certain views while you're outside of government. But when you are inside of government, there's the other challenge of how those interact with the reality of governance. And there's a long history of people moderating or totally changing their views when they get into government, because then they're confronted with serious data. On one hand, they're confronted with the institution of government, and the institution of government is a whole new animal entirely from what it is when you're outside of it. So,
the other thing is kind of maybe again, but how much we are expecting from these positions. Now, my family members, and I have direct experience with how government works, and it's not like what you think it is from outside, right? So just because you want to do something doesn't mean that when you go there, you're going to have a totally different setup where things are not going to be that easy to change.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's the naiveness of this, or it's just because they get so popular and then they get the position.
Yeah, I think it's because, in a way, I can say it's because, if you don't have experience of government, right, you can hold certain views and converse them and get acceptance in certain circles for those views. But while in government, right, the machinery of it, the rules and the regulations of it, and especially in something that as critically important as healthcare. There's a reason why the processes that you have within that sector are very detailed and very elaborate, and they take time. Now, that is not to say that reforms are not needed in some of these institutions.
Right.
We were both at the Oracle Health Summit, where Larry Ellison spoke about the approval process at the FDA and the requirement for them to physically print the entire submission they were going to make electronically, right? the outgoing director of the FDA device unit I mentioned, in one of his speeches, did say that the regulations in place are the ones that his grandfather, that was in place when his grandfather was still alive 50 or odd years ago. So that is not to say that reforms are not needed in this. However, just the nature of the healthcare sector makes it imperative that there is a deliberate process in place for these.
And maybe you and I, we have seen that firsthand because we were providing updates to our United Medical Network provider and the patients and the employees during the COVID time, where they were accelerating the process of getting the vaccine approved. And actually, Trump was in charge at that time. So
yeah, it's forgotten that the Operation Warp Speed was.
It's not like Biden didn't actually come up with the vaccine. Trump did. And he was actually kind of proud of that, right? I mean, he was really happy that we were able to do it so quickly.
Yes.
And I remember our discussion that time where you actually made it, like when I had some, kind of concerns, you said, well, come on, this time they put all the resources into this. They don't do anything else.
Yes.
So that's why they're able to do it a lot faster.
And the technology is advanced.
Right.
The way Ford made vehicles in the 40s and 50s is not how they make vehicles today. The process is much faster. And none of us would say, oh, I have problems driving the Ford vehicle today because it's not manufactured at the same pace as it was in the 40s and 50s. That wouldn't make sense to anybody.
But that's how we are actually taking the changes, our approach, not me personally, but 97% of the people, they don't like changes.
Yeah.
And we make that mistake time to time, not to change the subject, but even with the electrical cars, right? So with the what do you call them, filling stations for them. So they said it needed to be subsidized by the government. And then Elon Musk was saying the other day, hey, well, they don't do the gas stations subsidized by the government. So this needs to happen on its own. But the first reaction to the change and the new things that are happening around us is this needs to be done in a different way. So it's not sufficient enough. It's not the efficacy is always in question. But the truth is, if you want the EV, then I shouldn't be paying for your choices, right? And the government shouldn't be subsidizing. And those are kind of like the part of the issue with what I see, other than him having this really troublesome voice where I'm in pain every time I listen to him. He seems like a good guy, but I don't know if I can listen to him for 10 minutes. I don't know if I told you this, but my mom had an uncle. He had a cancer. I think like he used to put this device on his throat, and that's how he would talk, and that's how he sounds. And it's painful, but he's in charge of health, but doesn't sound so healthy, although he looks healthy. So now, do we have other concerns about him?
Well, the other part of it I want to do with the decisions in the first Trump administration about leaving the World Health Organization, the WHO. He announced it in 2020. Typically, it takes a year to exit the WHO. But by the time Biden became president, he restored the U.S. membership of the WHO. And the speculation is that Trump might go back and withdraw the United States from the WHO again. But that is like the speculative at this point, because keep in mind the decision around that, his initial decision was based on the politics around the pandemic and his perceived role of China in this. So I'm not sure that those conditions necessarily exist this time around, but it is possible that he could reverse that decision. Now the thing about the World Health Organization is it is funded by members, but there are two categories of funding. There is the assessment of all member countries. The United States roughly contributes 500 million every year.
Million, not billion, right?
Million every year. But of that 500 million, more than half of it is voluntary contribution. By voluntary means that, as the term goes, is voluntary, but coming from within the United States or any other country that has a specific goal, a specific global health goal. So in the case
Now,
of
when you say voluntary, is it still the money still coming from the government?
No, not necessarily. Some of it, yes.
Let's
right?
elaborate that.
For instance, the United States government could fund a global health goal through the USAID, but using the infrastructure of the World Health Organization. That still comes under that 500 billion. A significant part of that 500 billion, for instance, comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has from the Gates Foundation, which has its own specific global health goals, but it funds that through the infrastructure of the World Health Organization. But that is still captured under that 500 billion. For instance, in 2021, the total amount credited to the US was again about 490 something, all back 500 billion. But under 200 million of that actually is the assessment of the United States from the World Health Organization. And that's how it works.
I mean, the one issue is who does, what's the role of who in the global health, right? So there's a structure already, there's a platform. So how it's being managed and who's participating is a different issue, but the platforms there, it's kind of like our ACO platform is there. So it works for some ACO programs, it doesn't work for some. This is the same. So it may not be the right people participating in certain ways, but I think the idea is needed. So
and one aspect of it that is often not immediately recognized, this issue of the yearly flu vaccines that we receive. Every year we all receive, we all receive flu shots.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the flu vaccine, the antigen, right? Typically, you get the release from the CDC
mm-hmm.
of what the formulation would be for the flu season. Now, how do they arrive at that? They arrive at that through the WHO centers around the world where they get the variants of flu disease across the globe. And then they have specific centers, including 2 in the United States, where they now look at all of this and they identify the dominant gene.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the information is now transmitted to the pharmaceutical companies to then manufacture the dominant variant that will be efficient against the flu virus in any particular flu season. Now, without that World Health Organization infrastructure, you're not able to now compound the right flu vaccine for any flu season. So these are the roles that may not be immediately obvious to people of the WHO this weekend.
So, Anthony, I think when we discuss these issues, people like you and myself, who were not born here but live here, we bring a different perspective to these issues.
Yes.
And sometimes when you are so kind of focusing what's happening in the United States only, from the United States standpoint, you may just think that this is all we do. So that's a stupidity most people don't even understand. So United States has in 70 different countries, we have military bases. So 70 different countries, 800 different military bases. So anyone with an average IQ would understand what that means. That's the influence, that's the control, that's the access. And who actually is the non-military way of uh, influencing what may be happening in these areas and how we actually act and how certain actions can be taken very quickly. So if you don't utilize this platform and destroy without the alternative, then we should close all of our military bases and come back.
Yeah, and going back to the point about the World Health Organization, it's not to say that there is no valid argument to be made about the need for reforms.
Mm.
The assessments, right, about by the time
reform is something we are actually we are building on what we have by protecting the structure, like the Constitution. So every time you are not happy with something, you are not rewriting a new entire Constitution, right?
You're just changing
the right.
basis of it, because those assessments are about nearly half a century old and needed to be updated. And I think that in 2022, they finally reached an agreement on new assessment levels for all of the member countries. So I'm not so convinced that the new administration will go back and withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization this time around. But I could be wrong, but I'm not so convinced that that's the decision made in that regard.
So, Trump had a huge victory with this election.
Yes.
Now, that wasn't just what he has done, but also how bad the Democrats managed the whole situation. Process. Like Biden not getting out early, they're putting Kamala as the only choice. And so this was kind of, yes, I mean, Trump put a lot of efforts, but he also didn't win this by himself. He won this election with the help of Democrats.
Yes.
Right. So this becomes an opportunity. Like if I were in his position, I would see this as an opportunity to, like, because he's going to serve only one more term. So 78, 79 years old, he's going to be 83, and then that's also his limit is done, right? So they can only do 2 terms. So then why don't we take this as an opportunity and then make things right rather than just going after the system and then like the structures that we already have. And like that's not going to stay there. 3 to 4 years from now, someone else is going to change everything back. So instead of just building something more constructive and just, having a progress that everyone would welcome, going to this extreme is just going to make things really muddy in the next 4 years. And I think that's an opportunity loss.
I'm naturally an optimistic person. And like I said earlier, it's one thing to say things while you're outside of government, but you will face a different reality when you get into government. And while some of these appointments are certainly out of left field, there's no telling what might come out of them. If you look at it from the other side of it. For instance, you mentioned Elon Musk and efficiency part of it. There's certainly a case to be made for government efficiency.
But here's the funny thing, though. For something that you are trying to make the government efficient, for a position of one, you appoint 2 people to them. So it's kind of like, to me, like, it's contradicting what you are trying to do. Why do you need 2 people to make things more?
Wouldn't one of them be a deputy?
I don't like between the two who's going to be that. Like they're both very opinionated and strong and successful people.
I would think Elon Musk would be.
Elon is not up for those types of positions. He's not going to be like this government. You can't just do what you want to do.
Yeah,
You'll be in jail,
you
and
can.
I don't think
Yes.
he's going to be able to follow the bureaucracy and obey those. So then he's going to get in trouble. And then also, like, does he really have time and experience to do that? Doesn't. I mean, running a private company versus running a government or the government branch, it's not the same thing.
And keep in mind that most of whatever they come up with, at least a good percentage of that will have to go through Congress.
Right.
And then that's a whole different discussion entirely because
That's why I'm saying that. So it's not like here, like when we in United Medical, so here, when I want to turn this room into a studio, I didn't need to get an approval from everyone
yes,
except Susan. So
and then it gets done.
it's done. So if I have to go to 5 different committees
Yes.
and make sure that this is done this way, that way, and then you are going to be like, it's going to be 1 year,
Yeah, it's
right?
at least.
And you wouldn't want to do that. Who wants to do it? And that's why I don't understand, unless like it's like a Secretary of State position or Secretary of Health. The rest of them are balonies.
No,
And
but then again, which is what I say is the other side of it. Elon Musk is an incredibly smart person, and it is possible that he could come up with revolutionary ideas about how to manage government better, and then get some of it widely accepted across the board. It's possible.
well, I'm not saying he's not, but I don't think he can function in the government. So, like right now, my younger sister is the general manager of the women's status in the Family and Social Services Ministry. Everything they have to do is going through hundreds of people before it can be finalized. I would die in that situation. So, like, we want to do this, we do it together, right? So now, in order to get you as a guest, I need to get 5 different approvals. Who has time for that?
It's certainly going to be a challenge.
So
just from
I mean, instead of
watching
focusing on those and just like do what you are doing best and then let people benefit from those. But then getting into this is just a distraction. Like right now, what I do as a CEO for United Medical. Now, let's say our not I won't name anything. Our new governor says, "Well, Kemal, I want you to be in charge of this." I don't want that. And how am I going to function in that? Right? I don't want to be a governor either. So I want to have a voice in the governor's office, but I don't want to be the governor.
and this is not to speak of the potential conflicts of interest
right.
that could arise. We were talking earlier about the FDA approvals and
he has a lot of business that he already is doing business with the government.
Right, that will go through FDA approval. Neuralink,
that's Starlink, yeah.
And then there's the AI Grok, I think Grok. That's also there. So all of those issues now bring up a whole different conversation on the issue of the transparency of conflict of interest and so on and so forth.
So the intentions may be good, but the outcome is going to be miserable. So as the old saying says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So and we can't really just unless there's a reason for reform. And that reform needs to be not done by only a group of people, it needs to be done by the vast majority of the people. It cannot be with 49.7 or 51.2%. It has to be with people who are actually buying there. But rather than trying to become more distractive in a way, just focus on what you do best. right? So then it will actually people will benefit better from what we are doing. But I see some kind of like it's like a Trump's casino. Like there are a lot of musical shows, and now they're like the boxing and this. They are. I'm worried that they are going to turn this into like a big, you know, virtual show. So instead of focusing on what can be done, Trump has a lot of potentials. He can, he can do certain things. He can deliver only if he focuses on those. But I don't see a good start.
I like to be optimistic, so
I'm optimistic.
I mean,
well, optimistic versus realistic. Let's make sure that when I told Biden's people, "Hey, you should get out of this now," when you don't have the support. That wasn't me being pessimistic. That was, hey, they don't want you to run again. If he has done that decision earlier, then people would have options on the primaries, and then they would process who they want, and they wouldn't stuck with the person who's least likable person by the Democrats' choice, like 1% in the 2020 primaries. She's the first one who dropped out. Then was I pessimistic when I was telling and giving these warnings? No. But it's just so in order for us to be, yes, optimistic and have a better outcome, we have to be realistic and not to, make major vital mistakes like this. I think these are like if you don't get my buy-in by now in the new government and what we are trying to do, like we shouldn't be talking about Matt Gaetz guy. Like he's too dirty. He may be innocent, but he's too dirty right now. So people are just going to focus on all the other stuff. So you have a lot of people there. Why can't you just pick someone who's not going to get attention with what he has done or what he was the subject for, rather than just how great lawyer he was or she was? So what happened to that? So that would be a smart decision, but I kind of see the show-oriented approach. And maybe he's saying that, look, I'm 79, so I'm not going to be run again. I'm just going to have fun. But hopefully that shouldn't be on our expense.
Yeah,
I mean, Biden already has enough damage.
But then he also has his legacy to worry about. So maybe that
right for Trump.
Yes, that might that become a fact like this.
Great. Well, so we're going to get into some of the state stuff, but we'll do that later. Dr. Erkan is going to join me in 10 minutes for our Bariatric Friday. Anthony, thank you so much. So it's always fun and enjoyable when I have our directors participating in these and just kind of better understand and see what's coming. Thank you again. And we'll be back with our Bariatric Friday in 7 minutes. And until then, please stay safe and we'll see you soon.